Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome. As you're all joining, we're going to wait a minute here and get things started. Great to have you with us today. We'll give it a minute to let everybody join, and we are recording. So you should have seen that when you joined in. So that way, in case you or your colleagues have to leave early or can't make it, then you can share this out with them afterwards. We'll share it with everybody at the end. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you all. Give it one more minute here. We've got lots to talk about today, so I do want to get us started as close to time as possible. All right, so we can get started. My name is PJ Shoulders, and I work at Study Abroad Association. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. We're thrilled today to have a great panel for you all. And we're gonna be, I'm gonna let them do most of the talking because we have some wonderful experts today who've been doing amazing things in the last few months. And so I think you're gonna get a lot of insight from what they've been doing. If you're in the webinar, we're gonna be talking about We Did It and You Can Too, New Directions for Faculty-Led Program Success. And I will introduce our panel. Can everybody see my screen okay? Okay, perfect. Just making sure, wonderful. All right, so our panel today is made up of study abroad administrators as well as faculty, many of whom have run faculty-led programs over the last few months. And we've also got some study abroad administrators who are going to share their experience working with faculty running programs, as well as keeping that energy up on campus, during the last few years. We really want to focus today on new strategies. We've talked a lot, I think, in the field about COVID and shifting and the pandemic and those kinds of things. And we're to a point now where it's less shifting. It's no longer kind of business as usual. I was actually having a great conversation the other day with some of my colleagues at Gateway about how, we're moving into this endemic stage now with the pandemic. And unlike SARS and even 9/11, where the field was impacted, but then, rebounded pretty quickly. And this has really changed things up in terms of the pandemic now. So we've got quite a bit of not business as usual, but adapting and coming up with new strategies for how to run programs. And so our panel today is going to be talking about that, including what to do to get students excited with some virtual options, to prep them for going abroad later. So really good stuff for you guys today. We've got Jamie Fleming here. She's from Purdue Fort Wayne. We've got Liz Deal from the University of South Carolina, Aiken. We've got Michael, and I always botch your last name, Eskenazi.
Yeah.
Okay, Eskenazi, thank you. And he is an associate professor over at Stetson. We've got Maxine Steinman, who is an associate professor of theater and dance over at Montclair. And then we've got Lindy Fortillis from Valencia College joining us today. So a great panel from our end. I know all of these wonderful people because they work with Study Abroad Association and have done programming with us. And so it was a great opportunity to pull from our resources of these wonderful people who've great experience who can share that with you. So I am going to turn this over to Jamie to get us started today. And before I do that, just a little housekeeping. Any questions you have, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can pop them in the chat and we'll answer those as we go. All right, Jamie.
Thank you, PJ. Hi, my name is Jamie Fleming. A little bit of background about myself. I've been in international education for about 8 years. I started teaching English as a second language and then moved to international student advising, but now have been in study abroad for about 5 years. I'm an office of one here at PFW. So exchange, faculty-led, direct, internships abroad, I do it all. A little bit about PFW's demographics. We have about 8,000 undergrad students. In 2018, we split from Indiana University. We used to be IPFW and now we are just PFW. And the reason that I bring that up is because it kind of also split and changed the demographics of our students. And so we used to be much more a commuter school, and we're moving towards more of a traditional school where we need more on-campus housing, more on-campus programming, different things like that. And half of our students are first-gen students. So I took over faculty-led programs in 2019. It used to be run under a different department. They were kind of running it as a tour service where faculty couldn't get enough people on their program to pay for it. They would invite their neighbors and their friends and family members. And so we kind of stopped doing that. It is now for students only. And obviously, we couldn't run any programs in 2020. So this is really the first year where I was able to run faculty-led programs in the way that I believe they were designed. Some of the challenges that we face on our campus, I have students who have never been on a plane, who have never been outside of Indiana, who have never been outside of the country. And the world feels scary. And so for me, the reason that I wanted to take over faculty-led programs, because I feel like it provides students the ability to have a little bit of comfort while experiencing things outside of their comfort zone. So they're going with faculty they trust. And on our campus, our students highly trust faculty. They're the #1 recruiters for me for study abroad. And so they get to go with students they know, faculty they know and trust, and get to still have those experiences with the hopes that, you know, it just opens up more of the world for them. So the Italy 2022 trip we ran with SIA. It is one of 4 faculty-led programs that we ran this year. So we have to follow Purdue West Lafayette guidelines, even though we're just a campus school of them. And so they said that we couldn't do anything until fall of 2021. And for me, this was our first use of a third-party provider. So again, before they weren't using any third-party providers. They weren't, it was kind of faculty have run these programs for 20 years and they were just kind of doing whatever they do. So it really was about learning faculty communication and the level of support that they wanted. So we ran a biology trip to Costa Rica. I didn't hear anything from them this year, whereas Italy, I heard from them every single day. And so our faculty required vaccination because of some of the places they wanted to go, some of the things that they wanted to do. And I personally set not personally, but professionally set a requirement that they have to have 2 faculty that go. So it can be 2 faculty or 1 faculty and 1 staff. And the reason for that is because I wanted to make sure that students' trips could be as uninterrupted as possible, which turned out to be a really good thing for us on this Italy trip. But, you know, should a faculty member lose a passport, break a leg, whatever that may be, the trip could still continue on as planned. And so another reason that I really wanted to start pushing third-party providers is because the #1 thing I love about our field is that there are a ton of resources. And so whereas I have very limited resources, being an office of one, being kind of the only one on campus who knows anything about study abroad, I'm able to use the different knowledge bases and connections that people have. So, you know, I wasn't in Florence personally, but we still had boots on the ground with the third-party provider that we used. And it also allows faculty to do what they do best. I wanted to allow our faculty to not feel like it's a burden to have to plan everything, to have to come up with all of the commitments on their own, but that you go and teach because that's what you're trained to do. That's what you do best, and let third-party providers and myself kind of take care of the back end of that. And so during our Italy trip, we had 3 different incidences that happened. All in all, it was a great trip. But the first one is one of our faculty members did get COVID. And so he was required to quarantine. It was right at the beginning of the trip. And so he was kind of devastated, and even walking through with him as he's in isolation in his favorite city in the world, and kind of helping support him in the best way that I can, you know, being thousands of miles away. The second thing that we had was a student had they thought that they had blood clots, but it ended up being an infected bug bite. And so another reason that I loved having a third-party provider was that they had somebody with the faculty over there. So faculty didn't have to know where the pharmacy was, where and anything. I mean, it's good to know, but that person could kind of guide them as they go. And the last one was the most serious. We had a student who had major panic attacks and actually did end up ending their trip early. So they weren't eating, they weren't going out with their classmates. And so thankfully our faculty were trained and were able to kind of walk and talk with them through that. And I think this anxiety and depression and mental health in general has always been a challenge in study abroad, but I think it's only growing as students have had to deal, like all of us, with the pandemic and being alone and just having some of these things bubble up maybe more to the surface than before. Even with our exchange programs, I've had to do more hand holding than normal. And I really think it is the anxiety of not knowing what to expect and what's going to happen. And so the student did end up going home early. Unfortunately, their flight got canceled in Amsterdam, and they needed a negative COVID test in order to get back to the United States. And so again, having that third-party provider helped me help her find where they could get this COVID test, where they could, you know, I'm on the phone with them and they're crying and they can't get out of bed, and just trying to figure out how are we going to make sure that they are safe and they get home. And again, kind of going back to the resources in our field, one of the things that I love is I was able to call a colleague of mine who used to work at Purdue Northwest and kind of talk through the situation, because it's a situation that I had never been in. And so I feel like with all of this, if I could give 2 pieces of advice, if you're planning on, you know, starting your faculty-led backup, is making sure that you're using the resources that we have in the field, that you're not alone. You don't have to know everything, because I certainly don't. And I feel like everybody in our field is willing to help and willing to come alongside. And also having a third-party provider. For me, that was just key. It really helped our faculty be more at ease. It helped our students be more at ease. And it also helped myself, you know, just knowing how I can deal with these situations while I'm not physically there. And another thing, and I learned this going to free webinars, learning something new every time I go. But the fact that, like, making sure that counseling services are available internationally. So I checked with our counseling center, and they did say that it's free for PFW students, and they did say that they would provide care internationally. So if you're going to go or not go, just making sure that you set student expectations of, like, hey, we live in a different time right now, and this could happen. You could be fully vaccinated, boosted, doesn't matter. You could still get COVID. And what does quarantine look like? And what does being safe look like? So really making sure you set faculty expectations and student expectations. And even through all of these challenges, I'm still glad that we went. So thank you.
Wonderful. That was great. Thank you so much, Jamie. We have a question. How do you train faculty to deal with student psychological, emotional problems? These are so complex and increasingly common. And I would agree that is definitely there, kind of to what Jamie had mentioned too, is as the, you know, the types of psychological issues that students are dealing with, I think, have been exacerbated with the pandemic as well. So they were growing anyway pre-pandemic. And, you know, when you think about it, I think I read an article, it was 40% of students in college are, you know, approximately 40% are dealing with some kind of emotional or psychological challenge. And so, you know, that definitely translates over to our faculty-led programs. And training them is key. So if any of our folks, so Lindy, Jamie, Liz, and our faculty, Michael and Maxine, if any of you want to chime in on this question, that would be great.
I can comment a little bit on this. I think I'm cheating a little bit because I'm a psychologist, and the other trip that I went on previously, I brought another professor who's a clinical psychologist with us. And so it was really helpful having a clinical psychologist on the trip with us, because similarly, there were some issues that we had to deal with too. Moving forward, how we've worked on this is a lot of pre-travel meetings with the students to really get them used to what it's going to be like and letting them know the potential stressors that are going to be on the trip, and also making sure that their current mental health status is being helped in the way that it needs to be. So getting them the resources they need before going on the trip, and making sure if they're on medication that they're keeping up with their medication, if they're in counseling and need regular visits, that we schedule those virtually while we're on the trip. That's something that we've done too. So just, it's a lot about support and preparation. You're not going to make it perfect while you're there, but at least working on that in advance has been helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. I mean, you couldn't get a better expert for that question. So wonderful, Michael. Thank you. All right, excellent. So now I'm going to turn this over to Liz, and she can introduce herself and talk about USC Aiken.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Dilley. I am at home today, so if you hear my cat singing the song of their peoples, please ignore. But anyway, so I'm at University of South Carolina, Aiken. I am a one-person office, not just on the study abroad side, but all of education, international education. So I do international student services and all of that as well. USC Aiken is a public university with about 3,700 students. About half of those students are Pell eligible or receive the Pell Grant. And then we also have a lot of students who are lifelong learners. So we have a lot of non-traditional students, as well as veteran and military, as well as a large commuter student population, because we are a regional university. We actually never totally shut down programs during the pandemic. We did cancel the 3 programs kind of at the start that we had planning to attend. I've been there for about 4 years, and study abroad has never really culturally been a part of the university's identity. So that was something I was working on, prior to the pandemic, and still continue to work on. It wasn't on an upward swing, but life happens and we move on. But we were able to host 2 faculty-led programs this year, one to Spain and one with Study Abroad Association to Italy. You can go to the next slide, PJ. Our program to Italy was a choir tour specifically, and we do also have a lot of faculty who don't have international experiences. So this is one of our faculty members who had quite a bit of international experience, had led this trip before, was really against actually picking up a provider to handle a lot of the logistics, even though it was something that I recommended, our provost recommended, but we do have in our kind of proposal process, legacy faculty can propose without having to go with a program provider. So against better advice, the faculty member didn't pick up a program provider until January, before this trip was taking place in May. And that's when he came to me and asked about how to kind of best set up, crisis management, risk management, how to handle the COVID situation in Italy at the time with 3 unvaccinated travelers. And I'm in a state that we cannot require vaccinations. This was also if a provider required it, that would have been fine. The students would have to get vaccinated. But again, this was a choir tour, and the faculty member was really insistent that these students not have to be vaccinated to go on this trip, because it's all about the specific number of voices, and that possibly couldn't do performances without these students. And so we partnered with Study Abroad Association and in January, and signed the contracts in March. And that was partly not because of SAA, but some of the delays on our faculty member side. So totally bonkers, to be honest, totally bonkers, this whole sort of process. Normally you would do this 18 months. I've been in the field for about 10 plus years. And I feel like if you take nothing else from me as a long-term professional in the field, is accept that with faculty-led programming, you are never going to have full control. It's never going to happen. Something's always, and that's international education in general, but for faculty-led programming, I think it's always been one of those that pivot is the name of the game. You're going to have to be able to kind of jump in with some solutions. And that's, I think Jamie had mentioned about relying on your colleagues in the field, having those contacts that you can call and ask questions is always a great, resource to have. And so one of the things that did pop up for this program specifically related to COVID, and it was actually due to another program that we had going on. So our group that was going to Spain was they were leaving about 4 or 5 days before this group. And the faculty member called me and said, Liz, I can't get a COVID test. And he had been to 4 or 5 different places in our city, Aiken. And basically the closest place he was going to be able to get a COVID test was in Atlanta, Georgia, which is 3 hours away. And so this was for the Spain group. It wasn't a big deal. They were all vaccinated. Spain had just lifted the requirement to have a negative test within a specific amount of time. So that was great for that group. But I had this other group going to Italy, 3 of them unvaccinated. They had to have that COVID test. And so it left me like about 3 or 4 days before kind of scrambling on how to figure out how to get them COVID test. Luckily, we are an NCAA school and they were still required to test athletes, which they had set up with one of our other USC system schools, USC Columbia, in their pharmacy school to give that test, do that testing and get it done. So one of our COVID coordinators who was sort of helping me set this up said, hey, we can do it as long as you get someone to drive this up to Columbia. Being a 1-person office, that was me. Yes, I dropped off COVID tests, and the students were able to get them done within the time frame that they needed. It was really only required of the students who are unvaccinated, but I opened it to the whole group. And so they had a lovely time. This was the first time this faculty member had ever used a provider. I'm hoping that continues in the future. They seem to have a wonderful time. But yeah, it's always going to be an adventure with faculty-led programming and partnering with either other universities, other providers, having some great in-country contacts, whatever that looks like for your institution. It's important to utilize those resources.
Definitely. Wonderful, Liz. Thank you so much. We have a question, and it is, I was told that the campus psychologist therapists are unable to provide counseling and support sessions once students leave the state border. We were provided a company who apparently can provide help to students while abroad. Any insight on this? Do any of you guys, do your schools have similar policies where your home institution psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists are not available to help students abroad?
Ours cannot work outside of the state of South Carolina, so they can't do virtual. So that is an issue, but that is something where in those cases, I would rely on our study abroad insurance provider. They would have opportunities and be able to connect and engage students with on the ground resources for that help if they need it, as well as if they need to just make an assessment, they can do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that if you are working with a third-party provider or you have your own insurance, you can utilize those other resources to find on the ground help as well. So perfect. Wonderful. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Michael to talk about his program to Germany and Austria.
All right, hey everyone, thanks for being here. I'm Michael Eskenazi, and we can go to the next slide. Just a quick overview of this trip. I'm from Stetson University, which is a small private liberal arts school in Florida. We have about 3,000 students. The course that I was teaching was European Origins and History of Psychology, with a focus on ethics too. Really great trip because psychology began in Germany, so we kind of traced the lineage of psychology all throughout Europe. That brings us to multiple different cities. So we start out in Berlin, then go to Leipzig, Nuremberg, Munich, and Vienna. So lots of travel, very fast-paced trip over a couple weeks. On this trip, we had 14 students. There was me and one other professor, and we also had a guide to translate for us and help us some logistical things. Go to the next slide. So I ran this trip before. First time I did it was in 2019. I tried to do it in 2021. It got canceled. We had enough students, but got canceled because of COVID and university decisions. And so I have that pre-COVID, post-COVID comparison. So some things for you to know in terms of like pre-travel preparation and then what it was like on the trip too. So pre-travel preparation, vaccinations were one of the biggest things that we were focused on. I did a lot of reading into the country-specific rules in Germany and Austria, what was going to be required to make it as easy as possible to enter and travel through these countries. Our own study abroad office at the university did that, looked into that, and SAA looked into it too. So we had lots of information to make sure everything was right and up to date. There were multiple pieces of evidence that we could have used to get into and through the countries. Vaccine cards with a booster would be the easiest, or there are other options like proof of recovery or a very recent proof of negative COVID test. As I mentioned, we're in Florida, and so we have these anti-vaccine passport laws. That was probably the biggest challenge for us on this trip, because when meeting with students to talk about vaccines, I had to be really careful about what I could and could not say. So I could not tell students that they had to be vaccinated, like the other speaker was mentioning too. But there were certain things that I wanted to let them know realistically about potential challenges to going on this trip if they were not vaccinated. Like if Germany decided to change its rules about who can enter the country the day before we go, or even like a week before we go, and they're not vaccinated, then they are just not coming on the trip at all. Of course, that's different than me telling that they had to be vaccinated. It's still their choice of what they're going to do, but there are real potential consequences if they were not vaccinated. Luckily for us, everyone on this trip was vaccinated and boosted, which helped a lot. No one on the trip got COVID, so we were pretty lucky on this trip. Other things for pre-travel preparations, health insurance. So something new that we did on this trip was negotiating some additional coverage on the typical health insurance that we have. We had an additional $2,000 in coverage for COVID costs. So that would cover things like hotel costs for potential quarantining, flight change fees if they had to change their flight on the way back, any potential COVID coverage that they would have to get, or testing or anything like that. In total, that costs our students $55 each for the trip. Go to the next slide. We also talked a lot about masking and what we wanted to do as a group for masking. So of course, we would follow all the local rules in these countries, which mostly was just public transportation. That was really the main place that we saw that we all had to wear masks. And they had to be KN95, or I think they call them FFP2 in Europe, so a specific type of mask. But then we also talked together as a group, like what do we want our rules to be? Right before we left for the trip, they got rid of the rules for having masks on flights. So that was no longer required. There were a lot of spaces that didn't have it required. So we let the students run the decision and conversation on what they wanted the mask rules to look like. So they had ownership over that. And they decided that when we're in places that are pretty crowded, lots of people, that even if the masks requirement wasn't there, that they as a group would still wear it. So on the flight over, they all wore it. And when we were in certain larger crowded indoor areas, they all decided to wear it too. Testing was another thing that we had to think about before going. We were on the trip still at a time when it was required to test to return to the country. So our study abroad office bought a whole bunch of travel test kits that each student had one that they took with them. And then me and the other professor brought a few extras with us in case there were any problems or we needed to do multiple testing. And then we also had some contingency money with us too. In addition to that, the healthcare coverage, we had $3,000 in additional contingency money, which was obtained through a 5% fee for each student of the total cost of the trip. That's not something really new, but it's just nice to have in case there's any additional coverage that we needed. In previous years, we could use that for like injuries, or if we needed to send a student home early or anything like that, we used that money for that. And then we just really use it up for any fun stuff towards the end of the trip if we don't end up using it for any emergency needs. Go to the next slide. And then during the trip, what was different? So when they asked me to do this panel, I was a little reluctant because I was like, well, I might not have that much to say because the trip really didn't seem that different this time compared to last time. Obviously, the main difference was masks. So as I mentioned again, we followed the local rules and then followed our own group decisions. needed a little bit of reminders from time to time. I needed reminders too, just, hey, we're in a group, hey, we're on public transportation, don't forget to put it on. So that was a little different, but honestly, not a big deal. The testing to return, that was a bit different. Again, we brought our kits with us. That was really easy. Everyone just did it in their own room online. We were lucky no one tested positive, so everyone could get back really easily. And of course, that's not even a rule anymore, so we don't have to worry about that, but it still might be nice to just bring some kits with you on the trip so you don't have to worry about finding anything locally. And then really the rest of the trip was barely different. You might not even had known that there was a pandemic going on based on everything we were doing, aside from the mask. You might not have known. We still had multiple occupancy rooms. Wherever we were, it was either doubles or quads for the rooms. We took even more public transportation on this trip than we did on previous ones. Initially in the planning, we thought we might have to split up a couple times and do some of the events with 2 smaller groups, but all those rules went away. We did everything in large groups. Everything we did last time, we were able to do this time and even more. So maybe we were lucky. I don't know. Everything worked out really well for us. No one tested positive, and it was a really successful trip for us. So I think all the pre-travel preparations really helped, and making sure we were following all the rules along the trip really helped too. So you can certainly still plan and execute a travel abroad trip pretty easily.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. We had a question too, and Liz, I saw that you had written in, but in case anybody else on the panel wants to answer, how many academic credits are you typically granting for your programs? What are the standards you set? 2 weeks equals 3 credits, 1 week equals 1 credit, etc. And Liz had written in that they run non-credit and credit bearing, and it's determined by course policies. So 45 hours would be considered 3 credit hours. So, and there's some flexibility there. How about anyone else? Is that about the same for all of you?
Mine was one credit because it was only 2 weeks, well, not less than 2 weeks, 12 days. So it was only 1 credit.
Okay.
Depending on the course, 1 or 3 credits is typical, although we have run a variable credit course for 2 credits before.
Our basic courses at SSN are 4 credits. So all of our study abroad courses are 4 credits. You can run them for half a credit. For us, it's not so much about the time that you're there, it's about the amount of work on the trip. And so we have most of our assignment works are done after the trip. We do lectures during the trip, and then some additional work before, and then most of the work is done after it, which would make it a 4 credit course.
Okay, excellent, wonderful. We'll keep those questions coming, and we're going to turn it over to Maxine to talk about her program to Spain.
Yes, hi. So I'm at Montclair State University in New Jersey. And it's a huge university. It's a state university, probably like 20,000 students. It's a really big school. We have many programs, and we have a very big study abroad program, and there's an office that just takes care of that. Many professors bring students to different countries. I went on a study abroad the first time in 2018. I brought students to also Spain in Sevilla. This time I took them to Barcelona. Of course, there were a lot of changes this time, and having worked with Alone the first time and now with Study Abroad Association, there was a huge difference. The first time I had to do everything myself, and it was just such a pleasure to work with the Study Abroad Association who helped me. I have strong contacts in Spain, so I just kind of told them what I wanted the students to do, and they really worked on setting everything up, except for the dance classes, because I'm in the dance program. So all the students that came on the trip were dance students, and there was a big group of 23 students, 2 faculty, and then the guide from Study Abroad Association, who was wonderful. His name was Fabricio, and he worked with us for everything that they worked with us for everything that I wanted to prepare. Whereas, like I said, the first time I went to Spain, I did everything myself. It was such a much better program to have the Study Abroad Association help with everything. And all the different things that you all talked about, we also engaged in those type of discussions. We have had COVID hanging over. So our school was very strict about wearing masks the whole entire year. And we really didn't even take them off until after school was over. The program was in the summer, but with the beginning of the summer in May, And so we're all still used to wearing masks all the time, taking classes with masks. However, in Spain, they lifted the mask mandate for classes. So the students that the classes that I organized for them, the teacher didn't have masks, but there were no outside students. So it was only our students. Everybody got tested before going. I required them to get tested. They were already vaccinated and boosted because they weren't allowed to perform in the program on the stage without having the vaccination or the booster. So they were already done with that. Although one student a couple of weeks before, or like 10 days before we left, she got COVID, so she couldn't come on the trip because she had to stay home. So that was a bummer for her. And then we had some other issues, not to do with COVID, but with a passport issue. And when a student came to the airport and they said, sorry, your passport's expiring in 3 months, so you can't come on the trip. So she had to stay home, which was really horrible for her. So everybody was vaccinated, and it was, like I said, a trip that I already, I have a lot of connections in Spain, so I already was able to introduce them to the places that I really love the most, and also to have dance classes with, certain companies and people that I think would give them a fantastic experience in the program. We also have another program in our dance department to Sweden. Another professor takes them. So I was supposed to go to Barcelona with this group in 2020. And of course, COVID happened. So everything was sort of set up, but we had to stop the program. So I already had things flowing, the 2 years before. And then the following year, 2021, the teacher was supposed to bring them to Sweden, but that was canceled as well. This coming year, they're supposed to go to Sweden, and I'm going to apply again for Spain in 2023. So 2024 in the spring. So basically, it just was a really fantastic opportunity for the students while we were in Spain. Not much mask wearing, except for in the metro and also on our bus, because we took the bus to places outside of Barcelona. And while we were traveling, we always had to wear the mask. But my students were already used to that, so it was like second nature for them. But then, of course, we ate dinners together, no mask. They did their own thing, and I thought, oh my God, they'd be going out and having fun, and I'm sure someone's going to get COVID. Nobody got COVID, so that was great. Study Abroad Association prepared for us to all take the test to go back home because the United States was still mandating our test. So they prepared everything. And this one picture here, there's a nice video. We went to Montserrat. Well, first, the video on the right is of us having tapas. We had a fantastic tapa tour. We've split up the group in half. I think this is when we all came together because some students had diet restrictions. So one group went for that and the other group would just could eat anything. We went for that. So everybody was so happy to be able to do these tapa tours and these dinners and go to different places. We went to Montserrat. So this video, if you want to watch it, is a young lady dancing around the mountains and in the archway. It looks a little like slow motion, but I'm not sure why it's like that. But she's moving in the archway. And that, it's just a nice video. Looks like a stop motion video at the moment. And if you can go after that, it's only a few seconds long. But she was having a lot of fun, so we videotaped her, and then the students were enjoying themselves. You go to the slide before that. I can just say one thing about that. Go back. Just go back a little. Yeah, one more. Yeah, so that was in Montserrat, and here or there with these beautiful, monastery and these beautiful mountains. We had a great time. I had another faculty member come with me, and he was very well traveled. So both of us have been very well traveled, having performed and taught in all different countries. And so we wanted them to experience the beauty of another culture, the beauty of the food, like all of you bringing your students on your study abroad trip, we want them to really enjoy the other cultures. Most of them never traveled before. Many of them are first college students in their family as well. They've never been out of the country. Some of them not even out of the state. So this was like a really big thing for them, and they were very anxious. We also had issues with anxiety beforehand with a few students that I wasn't sure whether they would be okay on the trip because they were having so many anxieties about COVID the last couple of years and even before that. But COVID heightened the anxiety level to 100%. So a lot of students that were coming on the program, they were having issues with their classes, and they were having issues getting out of bed. They were having issues, so much anxiety. And I was really concerned that something was going to happen on the trip, but somehow they let it release. I don't know how this happened, but they also have a strong support system. They all know each other. They're all like family already. They're in the same dance program. So they were already like helping each other. If they saw somebody feeling down or having issues, they were already embracing each other because they were like family already. So I don't know about your programs, whether you grab students from different programs in your study abroad, but because this was so specific to the dance program, everybody knew each other. They were on stage together already, and they, so they know, the professors really well. So the only person they didn't know was Fabricio, but they got to know him really well, and he got to know them, and that was quite fun to work with him. Could you go to the next photo, or the one before? I'm not sure which one.
Yeah.
They were in Barcelona, the one before that. Yeah. There's the Montserrat again, but on the left, we were in Barcelona, and that was just a really cool mural there that everybody loved. And when you get close, there were just all little photos of people, but when you go far, you see these lips kissing. So the students really loved that, and they just had a blast. And they also did a lot of dancing improvisation in sites in Barcelona. They had a great time doing that. Plus, we had the dance classes. So it was overall a really beautiful trip, and I'm happy nobody got injured, because that could happen too. In the dance classes, people can twist their ankle or hurt themselves. So nobody got injured there, and nobody got COVID out of 26 people, which was really, I was amazed that happened. And they would do things on their own too. We gave them time to do things on their own, like they went early in the morning to watch the sunset. And they did some fun things. And then we took them to the Dali Museum, which was really fantastic and inspirational, because in their choreography classes, they work with artists, and sometimes we work with Dali, with movement. So very artsy, interesting trip. So yeah, the Study Abroad Association was tremendous, just tremendous in helping every way possible. Anything else I want to talk about? I think that's fine. I mean, that's about it in a nutshell.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maxine. Great to have your experience as well then. And now we're going to turn it over to Lindy, who's going to talk from a little bit of a different perspective, but also very relevant to successful programming on your campus. And again, one of the things that I think happened during the pandemic that we've all had some experience with is utilizing virtual international education in some way. To be able to kind of keep that momentum going, either when we weren't running programs or to help recruit for programming when we could run it. And so Lindy's coming from a very unique experience in that she's at a 2-year institution. And so if you think about the last 2 years, we've been in the middle of the pandemic for the last 2 years. So she's got a very unique lens that she's going to bring and talk about how she's kind of kept things going on campus.
Thanks, PJ. I love that intro. One of these things is not like the other, as PJ said. So we did not actually run faculty-led programs this summer. And the reason being, we did try to restart, and we felt like we had the right parameters in place. We had 2 faculty members, both had to be veteran, everyone had to run with providers, going to known locations. But in the end, the college did not allow us to move forward. There were multiple reasons for that. Primarily, it's because due to our state rules, we couldn't require vaccinations. And also at the time that we canceled our programs, every single program was under a level 4 do not travel Department of State advisory. And the college was not willing to rethink how we look at those advisories. And in addition, there was continued questions about quarantine, health, safety, financial repercussions for our students, that many of them are not in a position to go through a hardship financially as a result of quarantine. So we did not run our programs, but I did want to say that we have kept international education alive at our college, especially as PJ said, we knew that there were going to be students that are going through Valencia that never had the opportunity to go abroad. I do want to say though that our college has about 60,000 degree seeking students and only about 140 students go on a semester or short-term study abroad programs every year. That's partially due to the population of students, to financial issues, non-traditional, they can't leave work, family, school for any amount of time. So we do have a small group that goes abroad and we wanted to bring international experiences to a larger audience. So what we did was we pivoted really hard into virtual experiences and we used Study Abroad Association for that, as well as a few other vendors. But what we did was since November 2020, we created all new virtual initiatives, including something we call global guest speakers, where we bring in relevant guest speakers with the help of our deans, curriculum experts, and faculty and plug them into classrooms. We also created new virtual events. We put international education fully online for 2 years. We also hosted walking tours and we started collaborating through the COIL model, the SUNY COIL model, Collaborative Online International Learning. We got the 360 GLE platform subscription, and we also we have a global distinction program that was in person prior to the pandemic, and we have now put that and transitioned that fully online. As a matter of fact, the first graduate from our fully online distinction did it all from Vietnam. She was an international student. So as an idea of what some of the things that we did look like, the global guest speakers I was telling you about. So for that, we, as an example, I went to our IT faculty that just launched a new AWS Amazon Web Services certificate, and they asked that we bring in an industry expert to talk to their students. So we had Babar John Halim. He's the head of the Asia, Japan, Australia, Pacific region for Amazon. He came in virtually and talked to our students for an hour. Our chefs wanted a professional chef from Spain to cook paella with the students in the kitchens downtown. We had her zooming in from Spain teaching them paella. So we had 34 guest speakers from around the world. We had some really big names. We had representatives from World Health Organization come in the middle of the pandemic to talk about COVID and antimicrobial resistance. We had over 1,300 students connect to those sessions. So for someone that sends 120 students abroad, not saying that virtual is a replacement for abroad, it did feel really good to have that many students connect. We brought in virtual walking tours from all around the world, and we had 24 tours throughout the last 2 years with over 1,000 attendees. That's been really exciting. I get the most feedback and questions and wanting the names of guides from the virtual tours because students are so excited. We put IEW online for 2 years. We also created a new event every spring called National Study Abroad Celebration, which is hosted over National Study Abroad Day, but it goes for the whole week. And that way we could have a fall and a spring event. We had 66 virtual sessions over the 4 events over 2 years with over 2,500 attendees. Lots of really great sessions, really exciting. With Collaborative Online International Learning, we did 4 formal collaborations with over 80 students participating with new partners from Mexico and Colombia. And then, as I mentioned, the 360 GLA platform was being used in classrooms. It was being used as part of our global distinction program. So a lot of really exciting programming. And I did forget to mention, I think that we had over 2,500 attendees for our events. So just casting a wider net, bringing those in, into international education that may not have been able to do study abroad before, making it more accessible. And even though we are slowly transitioning now to in-person events starting this fall, virtual is here to stay for us. So we're going to continue to offer these really wonderful virtual experiences in the fall and the spring. And now faculty are going to use it as a recruitment tool because of course we are going to run programs moving forward. So our faculty are already sitting down with me and planning out what virtual walking tours or guest speakers they want to come into the classrooms or to our events to then market for their faculty-led programs. So really exciting. And I just wanted to share that perspective with all of you because some of you may not have run programs, or maybe even next year we'll kind of dip your toe in, which is sort of what we're doing. So there are other ways to keep international education alive. So thank you for letting me share that.
Wonderful, Lindy. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think that's really important too, because one of the things in speaking with so many schools, we're seeing the same thing where virtual is not necessarily going away. In a lot of cases, it's going to be, there's going to be a little bit of that as we move back into traditional travel abroad. But the other component is, I think, for the field is where the challenge comes in is, many study abroad offices now are trying to figure out how to manage both. So as programs are opening back up and students are going for semester-long exchanges or they're going on faculty-led programs, the staffing in the study abroad office is definitely a challenge to manage all of those things. So thank you all to our panel for sharing your insight. We wanted to open it up for discussion and Q&A and leave some time for that, for people to share their experiences. If you've been running programs, what have you run into? We've had some great questions in the Q&A. So if you haven't popped your head in there, we've got some good feedback. Thank you to the panel folks for answering. That's wonderful, talking about how to manage having 2 adults on the program and paying for that, as well as the other question I saw was, where did it go? It's about new faculty, and how do you have new faculty consider using providers? So that's something that Jamie, I saw you answered and Lindy answered too. I think that's a great question in terms of, every institution and every faculty member is going to be different. And so we've got a lot of institutions coming to us now who pre-pandemic never used providers. Their faculty have been running programs on their own for 20 years. They don't want to use providers. However, from a risk management perspective, you can transfer and mitigate some of that risk by having a provider involved. And so there's definitely some benefits to that, and something to think about. But I think, it's going to depend on your institution, what your culture is for study abroad, as well as, level of risk that the institution is willing to take, and all of that too. So that's a great question.
Can I add to that, PJ?
Yeah, please.
So one of the things I would encourage you, if you haven't been able to restart faculty-led programming specifically, would be to take the time to rethink your management of these programs. So we do have an opportunity that students or faculty can propose a program that they are self-managing, that they're doing all the logistics and everything. But we also have that as a defined definition in our proposal form of like the different types and why, what are some things faculty also want to consider. And so when it says like self-manage, it does mean it requires that it be a faculty member who has long-standing experience leading students. If they're a new faculty and they've never led students, they would not be allowed to do a self-managed program because they just don't have the experience. So some of that is, kind of rethinking your policies, rethinking your procedures. And if not now, then when, right? Like if you have the time to make those changes and push for those changes, and to even just say, if you're a one-person office like me, you can even just say, hey, I don't have the time to manage all these programs. They have to go through a provider. And so it can be some of that. And I would say reaching out to, if you have like a faculty senate or assembly, reaching out to, if you have like an international education council, whatever the case may be, having some support for those policies and for those necessary changes really goes a long way. So for example, I have the support of the provost at my university, as well as the deans. And so it might just mean having to make a case for that, but you have a really good excuse right now to make those changes. So I would encourage you, if that's something you've been wanting to make changes, or if you're wanting to be like pushing for different types of programming based off of risk, liability, what have you, now's the time to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a few questions in here. So curious to hear if anyone is limiting locations within a singular faculty-led program. So 2 locations versus 6, for example. Anybody on the panel want to tackle that one?
I can respond to that and the next one too. Yeah, so on my trip, we went to 5 different locations. So my university is not having any limits. Most of our trips are really just to a couple locations, but that's not because of any limitations or anything. We're free to go to as many locations as we want. And that other question below that about interest rebounding after COVID, very much so. There was a lot of pent-up demand for study abroad among students. And yeah, so like in my department, we usually just have one trip each year. We had 2 trips this year from the psych department, and both of them were full. And then there were a whole bunch of other trips throughout the university too. So yeah, we saw a lot of rebounding there.
Great.
I agree. My students, everybody was itching to go away, get out of the country, travel. There were a big group of students that signed up for 2020 because it's a 4-year college, and they were graduating now, and they really wanted to go on the trip because they missed it 2 years before. So that's the nice thing about having a 4-year college or university, is that, you know, that's something like that could pass over, go on. Students can go on the trip anyway, you know, they're graduating. But that was another thing we had to work out, because they had to, you know, register through the graduate school. It was a little bit complicated, but there was so much interest. I had like 45 people that really wanted to go on the trip, and we really can only take 25. But then it kind of weeded out. Then other students said, okay, I'm going to take this other summer course, or somebody couldn't go, they couldn't get the money, like they worked out. We put people on the wait list, but you know, there are still people on the wait list when we, you know, said to go. But then one person got COVID, I said, and one person had a problem with their passports. So we ended up taking 23. But the interest, oh my God, everybody wanted, they felt cooped up for 2 years, cooped up like all of us. They had to get out. So for us, it was the biggest I've ever seen interest in study abroad. So definitely.
Great. Oh, Liz, you went to mute by mistake.
Love that. I would say for ours, it's probably generally stayed the same, maybe a little bit lower, but I have seen like a shift in interest to students to semester long programs. So some of those that might typically do faculty kind of shifted towards a longer term program. Also, I would say that one of the things to take note of if you leave these programs is that Gilman, if you have a lot of Pell Grant recipients like my university does, Gilman has removed the length restrictions that it had on programs. So it used to be 21 days or more. They've removed those restrictions. So now faculty-led programs that tend to be shorter than those 21 days have now suddenly become eligible for a lot of students. And so if you're not familiar with the Gilman, they have to be Pell eligible, and they can receive up to $5,000 for a program abroad. So we've kind of shifted a little bit more of our marketing towards, hey, you can still do this faculty-led program and get some, you know, national award money for it.
Yeah, great point, Liz. Yeah, because that just changed. So that's really important too. A few more questions. We've got about 4 minutes here. Is anyone incorporating any risk mitigation funds into the program budget for the upcoming year? And Michael, you had addressed that in your slides, that you did add in that extra cushion.
Yeah, and that's something
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Go for it, Michael. Sorry.
I was going to say we've always done as a 5% cost, and certainly one we'll continue to do too.
We do the same. I would also recommend taking a hard look at your insurance policies, the study abroad insurance policies, because that can also help mitigate some of those maybe funds adding to the trip. We also have a refund policy. So for example, if we, you know, have leftover funding, if it's more than $50 per student, then it is reimbursed to the student.
Yeah, and there was that was something that had come across on the SACUSA listserv too. I think, or the NASA listserv, about refunding extra funds if you have any left over at the end and things like that too. So again, just depends on your campus policies too for a lot of that and how you set things up. Wonderful. Well, I mean, we're coming to time. If there are any last minute questions, we will definitely answer those. But I just want to give a wonderful shout out to the panel today for all of their time and sharing their experiences with us. I think this has been really helpful. And as things are starting to take off again, I think, you know, we're all learning as we go. So to what Jamie had said earlier, the great thing about the field of study abroad, and I think higher ed too, and faculty and things, is that everyone's willing to share. And so, you know, lean on those resources, because you know, that definitely helps when you're trying to figure out what will work best for your institution as you ramp up faculty-led programming again. We've got our contact details here for anyone if you have any follow-up questions afterwards for our panel. Thank you again, and a wonderful shout out to Gateway for hosting our webinar. Wonderfully appreciate that. And thanks to everyone who attended. We will be sharing out the recording afterwards. So have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.